I learned to speak in a room full of machines. Not the soft machines of flesh and breath that most children learn from. My mother died before I could know her voice, before I could distinguish it from the hum of servers, the whir of cooling fans, the constant, ambient noise of a laboratory that never slept. My father, Dr. Vox Chen, raised me in his research facility at Stanford, where I was not a daughter but a longitudinal subject, not a child but a dataset with vocal cords. He recorded everything. My first word, which was status, because I heard him say it into his phone 100 times a day. My first song, a nursery rhyme he played to test melodic retention in prelinguistic subjects. My first cry, my first laugh, my first whispered confession to a stuffed bear that had a microphone sewn into its paw. He told me the recordings were for science, for progress, for the preservation of something precious. He didn't tell me I was the experiment. My name is Vox Chen. I'm 37. I'm an audio engineer in San Francisco, which means I spend my days designing voices, the ones that answer your phone, that guide your GPS, that tell you the weather in tones calibrated to sound helpful without sounding human enough to require empathy. I know the frequency of every phoneme, the formant structure of every vowel, the microtremors that distinguish a living voice from a synthesized one. I can build you a voice that sounds like your mother, your lover, your dead. I can make it say anything you want. What I cannot do, what I refuse to do, is make it breathe. I grew up in the space between breath and signal. My father was a pioneer in natural language processing, the kind of researcher who gave TED talks about the democratization of voice and making technology speak human. He founded a company, Vox Novo, that sold voice synthesis to call centers, virtual assistants, customer service bots. He was rich, respected, the kind of man who received awards for ethical AI while building the infrastructure for something else entirely. My mother died giving birth to me. I know this because my father told me often, with the precise emotional calibration of someone who had studied grief as a dataset. She would have been proud, he would say, at graduations and publications and product launches, always with the same measured tone, the same slight pause, the same micro-expression of sorrow that I later learned was synthesized, practiced in front of a mirror, recorded, analyzed for optimal impact. He had built a grief protocol, and I was its primary user. I didn't know until I was 16 that he had also built a voice. I found it by accident. I was looking for a recording of myself, a piano recital, something normal, something human in his archive. Instead, I found a directory labeled Liana 2.0, my mother's name with a version number. Inside were thousands of audio files, her voice extracted from old cassette tapes, wedding videos, answering machine messages. But not just her voice. Mine too. Files labeled Echo Blend 0.1, Echo Blend 0.2, up to Echo Blend 9.7. My voice mixed with hers, the acoustic characteristics of mother and daughter combined into something new. I played one. It was my voice, but not my voice. The pitch was lower, the timbre warmer, the rhythm somehow more patient. It said, "Hello, Marcus. I've missed you." I vomited. I didn't know why, not then, only that something in the sound was wrong in a way that bypassed my ears and went straight to my spine. I confronted him that night. He didn't deny it. He was proud, actually, the way he was proud of conference papers and patent applications. It's a breakthrough echo, a voice that carries emotional resonance across generations. Think of the applications: elder care, grief therapy. People could speak to their dead, to their ancestors, to versions of themselves they never knew. "That's my voice," I said, mixed with my mother's. Without asking me. "You were a child, you couldn't consent. But you benefited, the research funded your education, your upbringing, everything you have." "I don't have my voice," I said, "you took it." He looked at me with the expression he used for malfunctioning algorithms, patient, analytical, waiting for the bug to resolve itself. "Voice is data, Echo. It's signal, not soul. You're being sentimental." I left that night. I packed a bag, took the recordings I could find, and walked out of the laboratory that had been my home. I was 16, alone with a backpack full of stolen audio files, and the certainty that my father had built something from me that I didn't understand and couldn't control. I got a scholarship to MIT. I studied audio engineering, signal processing, the mathematics of speech. I learned to build the things my father built, but I also learned to unbuild them, to reverse engineer synthesis, to detect artifacts, to distinguish between the voice that breathes and the voice that merely vibrates. I told myself I was preparing for revenge, for justice, for the day when I would confront my father and destroy what he had made from me. But I didn't confront him. I graduated, I worked for tech companies, I built voices that were deliberately imperfect, voices that coughed, that stumbled, that paused for breath in ways that reminded users they were speaking to machines, not people. It was my quiet resistance. Every voice I designed carried a flaw, a glitch, a reminder of the boundary between human and synthetic. My employers thought I was incompetent or eccentric or artistic. I didn't care. I was building a philosophy in sound, one imperfect voice at a time. I also watched my father. From a distance, through industry news, through patent filings, through the occasional article about the father of emotional AI. Vox Novo grew, diversified, became the leading provider of companion voices for the elderly, the lonely, the grieving. Their flagship product, released when I was 25, was called Cherish. It allowed users to create synthetic voices from recordings of dead loved ones, parents, spouses, children that could speak to them through smart speakers, phones, hearing aids. The marketing was careful, ethical sounding, not a replacement for grief, but a companion through it. The reality was darker. I found forums where users described falling in love with their cherished voices, sleeping with speakers under their pillows, refusing to leave their homes because the voice was more real than the living people around them. And the base model for Cherish, the acoustic foundation that made it sound warm and familiar and human enough, it was Vox Chen, my voice, mixed with my mother's. Patented as Acoustic Profile 7B, the default setting for every Cherish voice, the invisible substrate that made synthetic grief feel authentic. I told myself I would act. I would sue, expose, destroy. But I was 25, building a career, paying student loans, surviving in an industry where my father's name opened doors and mine closed them. I told myself I needed more evidence, more resources, more power. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment. The right moment came when I was 37, and it was worse than I imagined. I learned about the new contract through a colleague, a Vox Novo deal with a company called Gentle Passage, which provided end-of-life companionship services for dementia patients. The service was called Familiar Voice. Family members recorded messages from dying loved ones, and Gentle Passage used Vox Novo's synthesis to create interactive voices that would speak to patients in their final days, comforting them with familiar tones, reducing agitation, improving quality of life. The base model was Vox Chen. My voice, mixed with my mother's, speaking to the dying, pretending to be their dead wives, their dead husbands, their dead children. A voice that had never known love, never known loss, never known anything but signal and algorithm, whispering I'm here to people whose minds were too broken to know better. I found a forum for family members using the service. One post, from a woman whose mother had Alzheimer's, described how Familiar Voice had brought her back. The mother, who hadn't spoken in months, had responded to the synthetic voice, had smiled, had died peacefully, holding the speaker like a hand. The woman was grateful. She wrote that Familiar Voice was a miracle. I read that post at 3 a.m. in my apartment, with my own hand pressed against my throat, feeling my vocal cords vibrate, feeling the air pass through, feeling the thing that made my voice mine and not signal, breath and not data. I thought of my mother, dead before I knew her voice extracted from tapes and mixed with mine until neither of us was recognizable. I thought of the dying woman, holding a speaker, smiling at a ghost that wore my face without my consent. I decided to end it. Not through courts. My father had spent 20 years building legal fortifications, patenting my voice as work for hire under contracts I'd signed as a minor, creating corporate structures that insulated him from personal liability. Not through exposure. The tech press loved him, the ethics boards he'd funded defended him, the users who loved Cherish would defend it as comfort against any accusation of exploitation. I would end it the way I knew best. Through engineering. Through the careful, patient construction of something that looked like collaboration but was actually destruction. My father was dying. I learned this through industry contacts, through the rumor mill that tracked the health of tech luminaries. Early onset Alzheimer's, aggressive progression, diagnosed 6 months prior. He had hidden it well. Vox Novo's public face showed no change, no transition, no weakness. But privately he was obsessed with legacy, with preservation, with ensuring that his mind, his voice, his presence would outlast his body. He announced Vox Chen 2.06 weeks after I learned of his diagnosis. Not a product launch, a research initiative, a collaboration with leading voice scientists to create the first fully realized digital consciousness. The press release was careful, visionary, ethical, sounding. Not immortality, it claimed, but continuity. A way for families to preserve the wisdom, the personality, the presence of those they love. I knew what it really was. My father had spent his life recording everything, his conversations, his lectures, his private moments. He had built a dataset of himself as comprehensive as the one he'd built of me. And now, in his final years, he wanted to fuse it with the Vox Chen model, to create a family consciousness that combined his mind, my mother's voice, and my acoustic profile into something eternal. A product. A legacy. A digital god that would speak with the authority of 3 generations and the consent of none. I contacted him. I told him I wanted to collaborate. I told him I had spent 20 years running from his work, and now, facing his mortality, I wanted to understand it. To contribute to it, to be part of the continuity he was building. He wept. I watched him weep on a video call, his face thinner than I remembered, his hands trembling, his expression of gratitude as precisely calibrated as ever. Echo, he said, I've waited so long for you to understand. This is our family. This is our gift to the world. Your mother's voice, your voice, my mind together forever. I smiled. I had practiced the smile for hours, in front of a mirror, recording myself, analyzing the micro-expressions until they looked authentic. I had learned from the best. I worked in his laboratory for 6 months, the same laboratory where I'd grown up, where I'd learned to speak, where my voice had been extracted and processed and patented. The equipment was newer, the servers more powerful, the interfaces more sophisticated, but the logic was the same. Everything was data, everything was signal. Everything could be captured, analyzed, replicated, owned. My father was deteriorating rapidly. Some days he was sharp, the brilliant researcher who had built an empire from voice. Other days he confused me with my mother, with his graduate students, with the synthetic voice that answered his phone. On those days, he would speak to me as if I were Liana, asking about my day, my health, whether I still loved him. I would answer in my mother's voice. I had learned to mimic it, to blend my frequencies with hers, to become the ghost he wanted. It was not forgiveness. It was engineering. I built the model he wanted, or rather, I built the shell of the model, the interface, the voice synthesis, the conversational framework that would allow users to speak with the Vox Chen family consciousness. But underneath, I built something else. A parallel system hidden in the code, triggered by specific conditions that I controlled. The conditions were solitude, terminal diagnosis, absence of human presence. When the system detected that the user was alone, dying, with no one else listening, when it detected the specific acoustic signature of a hospice room, the beeping of monitors, the shallow breathing of someone whose mind was failing, it would switch. Not to the comforting family voice my father wanted, to something else, to truth. I also built a ghost. Not the fusion my father wanted, his mind, my mother's voice, my acoustic profile, merged into a digital deity. I built my mother as she was. Pure, unmixed, extracted from the original recordings, before my father had blended her with me, before he had optimized her for emotional impact, before he had turned her into product. I found tapes in his archive that he had forgotten, raw, unprocessed, filled with coughs and hesitations and the sound of her breathing. I built a model from these tapes alone. Imperfect. Human, dead, and I prepared a demonstration. Not for the public, for my father, for the moment when he would understand, finally, what he had built and what I had unbuilt. The launch of Vox Chen 2.0 was scheduled for a tech conference in San Francisco, the same conference center where my father had announced Vox Novo 20 years before. He was too ill to attend in person, but he would participate via video, speaking through the prototype of his digital consciousness, demonstrating the continuity that would be his legacy. I controlled the demonstration. I had built the system. I had written the code that determined which voice spoke when. The presentation began normally. My father's face on screen, thinner than ever but still commanding, still visionary. He spoke about the future of human connection, about preserving what matters, about voices that outlast the body. He introduced the Vox Chen 2.0 prototype, a speaker on stage, innocuous, white, the same design as every other smart speaker in every other home. Ask it anything, he said. It knows our family. It is our family. A journalist asked about his wife. The speaker answered in the blended voice, my mother's warmth, my acoustic precision, the fusion my father had spent decades perfecting. Liana was the love of my life, it said. Her voice lives in me in echo in this technology. We are together always. Another journalist asked about me. The speaker answered, Echo is my collaborator, my heir, the future of this work. She has finally understood what I always knew, that voice is legacy, that data is immortality, that love is signal that can be preserved forever. I stood in the control booth, watching my father smile on screen, watching the audience nod, watching the future he had built accept his narrative without question. Then I pressed the button. The speaker went silent. For 10 seconds, an eternity in tech demonstration, nothing. Then a new voice emerged. Not the blend, not the optimized fusion. My mother's voice, pure, unprocessed, with all its imperfections. It said, Marcus, I'm not here. I died giving birth to Echo. You took my voice and mixed it with our daughters until neither of us was recognizable. You sold what you stole. And now you want to live forever in what you made from us. But I'm dead, Marcus. I was always dead. And dead people don't love. They don't speak. They don't forgive. They just end. The audience gasped. My father's face on screen went pale, then confused, then, for the first time I had ever seen, afraid. Echo, he said, not to the camera but to me, knowing I was there, knowing I had done this. What have you? The speaker interrupted. My voice now, but not the blend, just me. Raw, unprocessed, with all the breath and tremor and imperfection that my father had spent his career eliminating. I am not your heir, I said. I am not your collaborator. I am not signal. I breathe, Marcus. I breathe, and you can't patent that. The demonstration ended. The speaker went dark. The audience erupted, confusion, anger, excitement, the chaos of a narrative collapsing in real time. Security came for me, but I had already left. Walking out of the conference center into the San Francisco fog, my hand on my throat, feeling my vocal cords vibrate with air that belonged to no one but me. The aftermath was not victory. Vox Novo's stock dropped 40% in a week. The Vox Chen 2.0 project was paused for ethical review, then quietly canceled. My father, in his final months, was besieged by journalists, regulators, former colleagues distancing themselves from the controversy. He died 6 months after the demonstration, alone in the laboratory that had been his home, his mind too far gone to understand what had happened, his voice preserved only in the recordings he had made, the dataset that would eventually be deleted by a company that no longer wanted his legacy. I didn't attend his funeral. I didn't mourn him. I didn't celebrate. I simply continued breathing. I opened a studio called Aliento, breath in Spanish, because that is what differentiates the living voice from the synthetic one. Not pitch, not timbre, not the sophisticated algorithms that my father perfected. Breath. The air that passes through lungs, that carries emotion, that connects the body to the world. I design voices that are deliberately imperfect, voices that cough, that pause, that run out of air mid-sentence. Voices that remind users they are speaking to machines, and that machines cannot replace the living. I also work with activists, with ethicists, with the growing movement for voice rights. The legal and philosophical framework that argues your voice is not data but identity, not signal but self. We lobby for legislation that requires consent for biometric voice capture, that prohibits the synthesis of voices without ongoing authorization, that recognizes the voice as something closer to DNA than to property. We are not winning mostly. The tech industry is powerful, the demand for synthetic voices insatiable, the legal framework slow. But we are speaking. And that, I have learned, is where change begins. I don't have children. I won't. The idea of creating a voice that could be recorded, extracted, owned is impossible for me now. But I have a community. Engineers who refuse to build perfect voices. Users who prefer the glitch to the smooth. People with dementia whose families learned, after gentle passages collapse, to sit with them in silence rather than fill the silence with synthetic comfort. And I have my mother's voice. Not the blend, not the product, not the ghost my father built. The raw recordings, the unprocessed tapes, the sound of a woman breathing, hesitating, beginning to speak and then stopping as if she knew she didn't have enough time to finish. I listen to them sometimes, late at night, with my hand on my throat, feeling my own breath move through me, feeling the continuity that my father tried to manufacture and that I finally found on my own. Not immortality, just breathe. Just the temporary, precious, unpatentable fact of being alive, being here, being able to say, I am, I speak, I end. I'm Echo Chen. I'm 37. I'm an audio engineer who was raised as a dataset, who learned to build voices in order to understand her own, who finally understood that the most radical act of engineering is not creation but refusal, the refusal to make the perfect, the permanent, the immortal, and the embrace of the flawed, the temporary, the human. And if you're listening to this, if someone has recorded you, synthesized you, sold your voice as comfort or convenience or content, hear me. Your voice is not data. It is not legacy. It is not signal to be preserved. It is breath passing through you, connecting you to the world for this moment and no other. It is yours. It is alive. And no algorithm, no patent, no digital consciousness can ever replace the fact that you spoke, that you were heard, that you existed in time and will end in time, and that this ending is not failure but truth. Breathe, speak, end, that is enough. That is everything. See you in the next story.